Hello. I wanted to talk to you about something that I saw when I was driving into Brisbane recently, and it was so touching. It was a really lovely moment. And I was coming up to some traffic lights, and I slowed down and stopped at the traffic lights, and I noticed that there was a father and his three children waiting at the bus stop, and the children were, or the youngest girl looked around about 3 or 4 years of age, the middle boy looked around about 7 to 9 years of age, and the older girl looked around about maybe 12 or 13 years of age. So they were waiting with their father at the bus stop, and the youngest girl went to sit back in the pram, and her father put his hand down to block her from getting into the pram. Now the child let out a very loud bellow that children do, you know, that familiar sound when children don't get to do what they want to do. But what was so lovely was that instead of reprimanding or scolding that child and getting angry because that child was performing some undesirable behaviour, the father actually picked his daughter up. The father, which is the parent, which is the guardian of that child, the guardian picked up the child and gave that child physical comfort, and he was just gently rocking her side to side while he was holding her, and he was just talking to her reassuringly and calmly. So he gave her physical comfort, he also gave her psychological reassurance, but he also magnificently diverted that undesirable behaviour to desirable behaviour. And he simply did this by pointing out further down the road that there was a truck. And trucks, when they blow their horn, they go toot toot. And he did this action, and then of course the little girl that he was holding went toot toot, and then before we knew it, all the kids were joining in and they were all toot tooting. So that was such a beautiful, beautiful thing that I saw. But the reason why it was so beautiful was because the guardian of that child reacted calmly. He reacted in a way that rewarded that child for desirable behaviour by changing that child's emotional state from one that was very distressed to one that was calm and one that was engaged with him. And this is such a beautiful, beautiful thing, but it's also such a scientific thing as well, because what we've seen there is a change of emotional states simply by diverting that child's attention and changing the situation to one that is rewarding and fulfilling and happy from the child's perspective. Now, what I wanted to talk about in this video is the science in emotion. And when we're looking at dog training, what we're doing is very similar to that situation that I just outlined. And of course, I'm not comparing dogs and children. I want you to really focus on the concept of the guardian in that case, being calm, reassuring, reliable and predictable for that child. And when we're talking about training our dogs, and I mentioned in another video that we can just robotically ask our dogs to sit or stay or settle on their mat. But if we're not looking at the emotion of the dog and the body language that is actually telling us what that emotional state of that dog is, or of your dog, if we're not paying attention to that, then that's where we're not going to see success in our training. And once again, training isn't just limited to a few minutes a day or half an hour a day. It's actually should be seen as a lifestyle and a state of mind. And I have mentioned that before in a previous video. But I wanted to really just focus on that beautiful concept of the guardian in that case understanding that that was a frustrating situation for that child, but the guardian's responsibility is to be calm, understand how to anticipate these sorts of situations, and understand how to divert or change an emotional situation back to a positive circumstance or experience for the person who's in distress, or for the dog that may actually not be responding in the way that we want them to respond. So I wanted to really just ask you to have a think about that concept and have a think about what you might expect of your dog when you're training with them, what you might blame your dog for not getting when you're trying to train them to do something, and how you're reacting when that happens. So if you could only take one thing away from this video, it would be to just start looking at your dog's life from their perspective and asking yourself, am I contributing to their undesirable behaviour that I'm seeing in everyday situations? And once we do that, we can then see such a broader picture of what's going on, because we then see how we can anticipate when our dogs may react in a certain way in a certain situation, and we can then manage that so much more effectively by anticipating it and then changing the situation and diverting our dog's undesirable behaviour back to something that's desirable. And by doing that, we'll also be rewarding our dogs for the things that we'd like them to do. So in that lovely little example, of course, that guardian of that child wanted his daughter to be happy and to be engaged and to stop crying, to change her emotional state from one of distress and one of confusion to one of happiness and one of fulfillment. So that's a really nice little example to illustrate how empathy, understanding and patience is the cornerstone to bringing us back to understanding what's important when we're trying to get our dogs to live with us in harmony in everyday situations, and whether we may be placing expectations and blame on our dogs when they're not responding in the way that we'd like them to. So I think that's probably all I'd like to say for this video, and we'll talk again soon.